Okay. Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Utapakam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Sri Visakamvitamscha Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sukaro Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo. Shri Guru Vaishnav, Shri Guru Parampara ki jai, Shri Guru Dev ki jai, Shri Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. All right, welcome again, welcome Hari Priya and all the rest that I mentioned already. And today we will be speaking on the fourth chapter of Jaiva Dharma. And the title of this chapter is Vaishnava-Dharma is Nitya-Dharma, meaning Nitya-Dharma meaning the eternal function of the soul. And this chapter starts with a very kind of intriguing, I would say, incident. So what happened in the previous chapter was that Lahiri Mahasai moved to Vaishnava Das's and Prem Das Babaji's Kunja because the place he was staying in, the Madhav Das Babaji had that fall down, and Lahiri Mahasai didn't want to take any risks that the other devotees would start kind of like avoiding him or whatever. So he moved in with Vaishnava Das and Prem Das Babaji. And let me do one quick thing here. And so now in the beginning of this fourth chapter, they are in the Pradyumna Kunja. And it's the evening time. And Bhakti gives this like short description of the Kunja. There's like different kinds of fruit trees and little bedal going on that has been there since the time of Pradyumna Brahmachari, who was a close associate of Mahaprabhu's. And so now Lahiri Mahasaya is chanting in his own kutir, and Vaishnava Das is in an adjacent kutir chanting his rounds. And Lahiri Mahasaya has this little light, some kind of a lamp in his room. And in the flicker of the light, all of a sudden he sees something that looks like a snake in the doorway of his kutir, and he freaks out and he picks up the lamp and takes a stick and is ready to kill the snake. And he shouts out to the other kutir where Vaishnava Das is chanting. He said, Vaishnava Das, be careful. I think a snake is like on its way to your kutir. And then Vaishnava Das probably chuckles at him and says, that's nonsense. Just come to my, not cabin, but come to my kutir and stop being afraid of the snake. And so Lahiri Mahasaya comes and starts Vaishnava Das's kutir, but he's still agitated, and then he can't stop talking about it. He's like, what, Mahasaya, our Shantipur is much better in this way. There's not all these kind of critters, kind of implying that Shantipur is like not a disciple at this point, but like a mentee or something. And he says that, basically he says that, well, the first thing he says, which I thought was kind of cool, he said, I'm sure you've read the Srimad Bhagavatam, think about Maharaj Parikshit. Like he was waiting for this like snake bird, and he knew for 7 days that he was going to get bitten. And he had absolutely no fear. I mean, this snake bird is like a beast that looks like a dragon, at least according to the BBT artists. And it like shoots out fire and stuff. It's a pretty horrendous way to die, die by burning by this dragon kind of monster. And so Vaishnava says, I'm sure you've heard that, instead of being afraid, Maharaj Parikshit, tasted the full ras of Krishna Prem by, stopping all of his material desires and only listening to Shukadeva Goswami. And then Vaishnava Das goes further to say that we have our karma, and there's nothing we can do to change that other than bhakti, of course. But in terms of the karma itself, it's going to whether you are going to be into it or not. And like, as long as you're not supposed to die according to your karma, you can sleep in a bed of snakes and you're not going to die. But if you're meant to die from a snake bite, then nothing can save you. And then Vaishnava Das says something that really stuck with me. I remember I read the Jaiva Dharma for the first time when I was a brand new devotee at 18. And this thing always stuck with me that Vaishnava Das says next. And he says that one can't really like consider himself or herself to be a Vaishnava, or one shouldn't call himself or a Vaishnava. Let's see the actual wording here so I don't botch it here. Therefore, one may not introduce himself as a Vaishnava until he gets rid of his fear of snakes and all such things. If the mind is agitated by such fears, how will one be able to fix it upon the lotus feet of Sri Hari? And okay, like this is a pretty high standard when you think about it. Basically, it means to be a Vaishnava, you can't have almost any, you could say any identification with your body, because fear obviously comes from your identification with your body. There's no fear unless you think that you, on some level, that you're this body and that you can be affected. And actually, Vaishnava Das Babaji makes that point. He says that the snake can never bite your siddha deha, which is a funny way of saying that you're not your body. So there's nothing to be afraid of. And I remember many years ago, like almost 15 years ago, pioneering. It was actually the first rainy season that anybody spent in Madhuban out of us, soft-skinned Westerners. And so I was sleeping in a tent in the corral. That used to be the corral. I don't even know what's there now because it's been so long since I was there. But I was sleeping in a tent, and then in the middle of the night, I like felt something under my back. And so I kind of jumped up and lifted my tent, and there was this baby rattlesnake right under my back. I hadn't ran to that point, so it didn't happen. Just like why that for a good while, and like sleeping was a little uncomfortable and stuff. So obviously I can't introduce myself as a Vaishnava yet. That's for sure. And so I think I kept sleeping there, but it was at first it was kind of hard to do. And another thing that comes to my mind is there are these like Christian sects that part of their worship, or what they do in their churches, I think this is somewhere in the South in the US, I think. So that's where all the crazy stuff happens, right? So they have this aquarium full of preachers or the priests. They test their faith by sticking their hand Oh, Matthew's saying I'm freezing up. Oh, yeah, the internet has been really bad here. Well, we'll just make do, and if you completely miss a point or something, then let me know and then I'll repeat it. But I apologize for the internet. Hopefully we'll get a better connection soon, because it's been quite bad for a few months now. So yeah, I was saying how the Christian, some of these certain denominations in the South, they stick their hand in this like aquarium full of poisonous snakes and test their faith in that way. Because I believe there's a passage in the Bible that says that if you have true faith, you can't be harmed by snakes or something like that. I forget the actual thing. And then unfortunately, a lot of the preachers die of it because they get bitten. And then I think maybe part of it is even that you're not supposed to go to the hospital. So, I mean, let's not be like that in order to call ourselves Vaishnavas, right? Like, we don't want to be dead Vaishnavas, right? So anyway, moving forward, then this, since Lahiri Mahashai saw the like faith of Vaishnava-Das and his actual detachment from his bodily conception, some faith was like building up in him. And then he said to Vaishnava-Das that, you know, this is what's happening. And because of being in your association, I've started to have faith in the Nitya-Dharma, the Vaishnava-Dharma, but that I still can't quite understand. I see that they're similar, but I can't understand how they are identical, these two, like Vaishnava-Dharma and Nitya-Dharma. And so he asked Vaishnava-Das to please explain that to him. And to really explain Vaishnava-Dharma and how that relate and how that is the Nitya-Dharma of the soul, Vaishnava-Das started in a very methodical way. Basically, what he does first is he, first of all, explains what Vaishnava-Dharma is and how there's different phases of it, and how there's also distortions of Vaishnava-Dharma. So he starts with explaining Vaishnava-Dharma in all of its different nuances, basically, at first. And he starts it by breaking Vaishnava-Dharma down to what he calls Shuddha Vaishnava-Dharma, which means the pure Vaishnava-Dharma, or the Dharma of pure bhakti. And then Vidha, V-A-D-D-H-A, Vidha Vaishnava-Dharma, which means the adulterated or impure Vaishnava-Dharma. And he starts explaining what this Vidha or adulterated Vaishnava-Dharma is for the benefit of Lahiri Mahashai, so that Lahiri doesn't have a wrong conception of what he's trying to achieve and what his goal of spiritual practice is. And it's not to put down other paths or anything like that. It's just that if you want Shuddha Bhakti, if you want the pure form of devotion, then you have to be clear on what it is, right? And a good start is to explain other forms of apparent Vaishnavism that is not Shuddha or pure, that doesn't only rely on devotion, but has other influences in it. And so first he explains this, there's more difficult terms, but just bear with me, I'll translate it all. So the first thing he says is he differentiates between Karma Vidha Vaishnava-Dharma and Gyan Vidha Vaishnava-Dharma. And I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. It means the Vaishnava-Dharma adulterated by karma and Vaishnava-Dharma adulterated by Gyan. Example of Vaishnava-Dharma adulterated by karma is the, let me see here. Yes, the Smarta Brahmanas, which means kind of like the orthodox Brahman class. It's maybe a little similar to, like in the Bible, there's the Pharisees. So these like learned people, Smarta Brahmanas in India. And they consider Vishnu to be just a demigod. the head of the demigods, but nonetheless a demigod, which means that then Vishnu is under the influence of karma instead of the other way around, like Shuddha Vaishnavas see it. And so then they do all these, like they chant Gayatri, they do puja to Vishnu and things like this, but it's all to Shubha karma, like we were talking about last time, this like auspicious karma, instead of going beyond the karmic cycle. And that's obviously not Shuddha Bhakti, and it's something we should avoid to do, like Vaishnavism aim of getting material, because we're which is the, you know, Vaishnava Vishnu is to just use the forms of these different divinities to finally realize that there are no forms, and that everything is one and everything is Brahman. And that is, of course, another form of Vaishnavism that we do not want to mix with our attempt at Shuddha Bhakti, because it's going to take us astray from our cherished goal, which we'll be talking about. Of Dharma, or the adulterated Vaishnava-Dharma. Vaishnava-Das quotes that famous verse from the Bhagavatam that explains the different approaches. Losing me again, huh? Just got a message from Ananga. Okay, I guess I'll start from the beginning, though this what I was just saying. So the next thing that Vaishnava-Das says is that he quotes this famous verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam that describes the three different approaches that humans have towards the Absolute. And it goes, Varanti tattva vidas tattvam yat jnanam advayam paramatmati, brahmati paramatmati bhagavan iti shabdyade. And it's basically saying that the people who are in the know, so to speak, they see the what's advagyan, like the one spiritual reality as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And then Vaishnava-Das goes on to explain how basically kind of saying the same thing as he was saying in the previous thing about the different consequential, no, what's the word? I can't find the word, but they are not like eternal. And that he has this interesting analysis of why about the Brahma pravritti, or the devotees or people who approach God as the all-pervading formless Brahman. It's naimittika, because nimitta means a cause, or like a material cause, and the naimittika word comes from that. So there's a material cause in striving for Brahman realization, because you're trying to get away from material suffering, really. That's a huge motivation in mukti. Like, you want to get away from suffering and from the material bondage. And then with the paramatma pravritti, Dharma of the practice itself. Of course, the goal is eternal once you achieve it, but the practice or the Dharma itself is not, because you're also motivated by wanting this happiness of samadhi. And so there's this subtle motivation of wanting to be happy for oneself. And the Bhagavad Pravritti in its purest form, like what we are attempting to follow as sadhakas, is that you don't do things for your own sake. It's the center is completely somewhere else than yourself. And that the fact that it's so selfless, that is the purity of the Shuddha, pure Vaishnava-Dharma. And the phase of the absolute, the one absolute that corresponds with this kind of this level of selflessness and complete dedication and giving of oneself, that's the Bhagavad Pravritti, which is the personal aspect. And hey, I'm back. I don't know how, can you guys hear me? Okay, I don't know how much we lost there, but maybe you guys can tell me what was the last thing you heard. You can write it in the chat if you want. I guess nobody heard anything. Well, anyway, I'll just continue where I left off. Oh, Bhagavad Pravritti as the center. Okay. So, yes, let's see here. Oh, yeah, I was saying how it's such a beautiful thing about Gaudiya Vaishnavism that there is no difference between the sadhana and the and the goal of that practice. And as far as I know, pretty much almost every other path that I can think of, there's a difference between their practice and what they want to achieve. And in some ways, we do have that as well, like because most of us are chanting Nam Aparad, which means our chanting is not pure. And so that's obviously not the goal, but the thing itself is not going to change. I mean, the cowherd boys, in Vrindavan, in the aprakat, unmanifest, or the completely otherworldly Leela, they chant there. They sing the names of Krishna. And the whole point of sadhana bhakti, as well as the highest reach of praying, is to serve the personal form of God, that we believe is the embodiment of all the three aspects that I just mentioned. And I don't know, I personally find it very beautiful that we are doing the real thing already. It's just us that don't get it, that we're actually doing the we're actually there in a very kind of figurative sense. We could be there if only our minds were pure. We would realize, oh, we are doing the thing already that we're hoping that one day we will be achieving. And then after Vaishnava explains all these things, then Lahiri Mahashaya says that his faith in this Suddha Vaishnava Dharma has been awakened. And then he asks for, he's in this very humble mood, and he asks for Siksha and Diksha from Vaishnava Babaji. But Vaishnava Babaji gets a little disturbed from that, because he is a true Vaishnava and he feels like he's unqualified. And he says, I'm not qualified to be a Diksha Guru, but I'll certainly give you instructions on Shuddha Vaishnava-Dharma. And let's just keep it at that. That's what he basically says. And then he starts explaining, so first explained the Vidha Vaishnava-Dharma, and now froze up. Okay, now it seems like you're back, right? Okay, good. My apologies again for this internet. Guru Maharaj is there's somebody's coming next week to see if we could have a better internet provider. So hopefully next week or in a couple of weeks we'll be flying, because the main thing is, of course, Guru Maharaj's Sunday talks, and when they get stuck like this, it's a real pain. So let's hope for the best. Anyway, back to the topic. So after explaining the Vidha Vaishnava Dharma, the adulterated Vaishnava Dharma, then Vaishnava Das starts talking about the breaking down the Shuddha Vaishnava Dharma of, the different parts of that. And he says how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recognized three different fundamental principles in Shuddha Vaishnava Dharma, which are, of course, sambandha, abhideya, and prayojan. And real quickly, those terms mean my Guru Maharaj uses a really fitting term for sambandha, conceptual orientation. So kind of like the map of what you're supposed to strive for, and what's what fits, how things fit together, really. Excuse me. Well, I guess patience is a virtue, right? So we're really becoming virtuous today, huh? Whew. Okay. So what I was saying is that the sambandha, abhideya, and prayojan, you can think of them as, you have a map of San Francisco and you want to go to, the ferry building. So that's the map is the sambandha, because you have to know things are in relation to each other to know where you're going. So that's the sambandha. And the abhideya is a pair of healthy legs, for example, or your Uber app, that you use. But it's the act of using something to reach your goal is the abhideya. And of course, in the case of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, Nam Bhajan or Harinam is the main abhideya, but there are others as well. And then the prayojan is, of course, the ferry building itself. That is full of life and shops and everything. If you've ever been to San Francisco, it's a real hub of like busy activity and all kinds of interesting things. So that's then what Vaishnava Das is starting to explain, these three different principles of Shuddha Vaishnava Dharma. And it's really interesting that Bhaktivinoda really emphasizes that it's absolutely necessary to know sambandha-jnana to reach, to basically have Krishna Prem, that you cannot have the final destination of Krishna Prem without sambandha-jnana. And I would like you guys to tell me why exactly it is so important. And I have two questions. Why is it so important? And how much of it do you need? So let's see what kind of answers you can come up with. And if you don't feel comfortable saying anything, then you can write a short thing in the chat or. So this is a nice one. Matthew says that we need to less by luck you just happen upon there. And I'm not sure what I said. I think it cut off, right? I was saying that Matthew said that we need to intimately know the object of our love, and that's really what it's all about. And Shamananda and Sakirati, I'm assuming SNS is that, because there's K and K, so SNS must be Shamananda and Sakirati. So they say without sambandha, you can't know the way, and that's also true. And then Sarada says, if there is no difference between sadhana and the goal, is it in the Shastra that what is important? Is it in the Shastra that what is important is the praying within or linked with the intent of the sadhaka? I don't quite understand the question. Yeah, there you go. Thanks for clarifying for a simpleton like myself. So Sharda says intent is important, and that's absolutely right. So really, when I was a young devotee, I couldn't understand why everybody didn't end up in Golok when they chanted Krishna's name, because it's Krishna's name, right? So why do you have to have a certain conception? Why does the name itself not purify you? That was my question. And then later on, especially when I connected with Guru Maharaj, and he very much emphasizes sambandha-jnana, that's really what he tries to push to devotees as his service, is to really understand the sambandha-jnana of Gaudiya Vaishnavism clearly and comprehensively. So then I realized that Krishna Nam, or the Maha Mantra, okay, you back? Okay. So the last thing I was saying, that I couldn't understand at first why. Okay, good. Okay, thanks, Matthew. So I think we're back, right? So sorry about this. Anyway, third time is the charm. So what I was saying is that, no, you kidding me? No, okay, no. Oh, the Maha Mantra, let's see if that's the word that freezes the computer. The Maha Mantra, no, is like spiritual rocket fuel. That's what I came up with. That's what I thought. Like, it's like rocket fuel, which means it'll take you spiritually where you want to go. But rocket fuel itself is not going to tell you where you're going. And Krishna says in Gita that however you approach me, that's what you're going to get. So when you put those two things together, you have this amazingly powerful mantra in the Maha Mantra. Okay, we're back. So from there on, then when I understood this point, really because of Guru Maharaj, then it was much easier for me to kind of apply myself in really understanding the goal and understanding why it's so important. But then there's the question, of course, and Lahiri Mahashaya is going to ask this question, like, how much sambandha do you have to have? Like Lahiri Mahashaya asks, do we have to be scholars in order to get Krishna praying? Because you're saying that this knowledge is so important. And then Vaishnava-Dharma says, no, not at all. Like, you don't have to know any specific language, or you don't have to be a scholar to have the right amount of sambandha-jnana. Really what it is you get the basic idea of what is what, and then you start practicing. And that practice fuels your sambandha-jnana. It's not Okay, I very much appreciate you guys not going crazy and just logging out, because I'm almost about to log out myself. So what I was saying was that the question is how, anyway, like how much sambandha-jnana is necessary. I don't know how much you guys heard, but I was saying that Vaishnava says that it's not that you have to be a scholar or know all these languages or anything like that. It's just that you need a pure guru who will give you shiksha and diksha. And by hearing his words and observing his behavior, that's how you get sambandha-jnana. And I thought it was very nice that Bhaktivinoda added that you observe the behavior, you learn from behavior, kind of like kids learn from their parents' behavior. In a lot of ways, a lot more than what the parents say. And so that's a really nice point. And so really the culmination or the actualization of your sambandha-jnana comes from sadhu sangha. The last thing I was saying is that the culmination or the actualization of sambandha-jnana comes from sadhu sangha. So first you study the scriptures, and then you create some faith, and then you want to associate with pure devotees or really advanced devotees. And from that association, understanding of sambandha-jnana gets supercharged. And then with that new understanding, you go back to the scriptures and you study them more. And then it becomes this cycle of sadhu sangha and shastra that really kind of supercharges your understanding of the sambandha-jnana. And then the question is like, how much sambandha-jnana? Well, the thing is, the more pure you get, the more you want to learn about where you're going. And I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience, like when you joined, there are so many details about the lila and stuff that you are probably not interested in. Okay, backtracking a little bit. So like, I'm sure that when you guys joined, it certainly is true for me, when you own, I think it cut off a little bit. So like when you got involved in Krishna consciousness, I'm sure you weren't that interested in all the details of the finer details, like the lila and all this rasa tattva and all these like fine theistic points. It was kind of like, yeah, whatever, I'll get back to it at some point. And then I'm not this body, prasad is great, let's do kirtan, that kind of thing. And then the more mature you become as a devotee, sort of automatically, not that you become a scholar because of that, but it automatically leads you to get more interested in the deeper details of Krishna's personality, all his features. It becomes like more real to you as you get further along. And there's a discussion about Arikar in this chapter as well. I'm kind of paraphrasing because it was a very long chapter and there's a lot of stuff to go through. So I'm kind of just riffing it from wherever I'm at right now and explaining it from there. So Lahiri Mahashaya asks about Arikar for like between Vaidhi Bhakti and Raganuga Bhakti, because that's another distinction of Shuddha Bhakti. And that is such an important point, that you have to be aware of your Arikar, even in terms of, in the lower sense that I was talking about, like what are you interested in? That you understand, if you're not interested in the higher topics, that you understand that they are important because your guru wouldn't be talking about it otherwise. But if you just don't have interest in it, then, listen to it and take it in, but like, don't get obsessed about having to be some kind of Raganuga Bhakta, because that's completely artificial. When you actually when the desire for these topics, the higher topics, arises in your heart, and when you get genuinely interested, like when that's actually where you're at, that's who you are, then you add that to your practice and your understanding gradually. And it's very unfortunate. I mean, of course, some preachers have really emphasized the Raganuga aspect and kind of clarifying what Shuddha Bhakti, which is really important, that we don't have this idea that Bhakti is just about book distribution or some kind of external thing, but what really so what that Shuddha Bhakti, we have to be clear on what Shuddha Bhakti is theoretically, so that we know what we're involved in, so that we really understand that in its heart, Shuddha Bhakti is this internal cultivation of a personal relationship with God that appears in this incredible Krishna form. But at the same time, we can't fake our interest in the higher topics if our Arikar is not there. And we should definitely there, because what happens is you can seem like an advanced Vaishnava for a while and impress everybody around you or whatever. But if that's not real for you, normally what happens is you end up dipping lower than what your actual Arikar is, because it's this rubber band thing. You just like force yourself to be the Uttam Arikari, and bam, you're on the floor. So we have to be a little careful about that. And a nice example of this Arikar is my wife, Vrindrani, right now, she's in this like intense scriptural study mode. And her ability to stay focused on this like extremely fine, like subtle philosophical stuff is just unbelievable. Like she can do it all day, every day. And I would like to keep up with her, because she's studying the Sandarbhas, Jiva Goswami's Sandarbhas right now. And I'd love to keep up with her, because then, you feel like you're more on the same page. And of course, you want to feel that with your partner, and a spiritual, really like a mentor for me at the same time. So you want to feel that, but I can't fake that, because I simply could not do what she's doing. And so then I have to just be honest about it and be like, I'm not there yet, I can't do that, but I very much appreciate what you're doing. And from that appreciation, I hope, and just keeping the good company of my Guru Maharaj and Vrindaranya, that I start, that starts coming naturally to me. And I think probably the power of sadhu sangha, or good association, is that in some ways it impresses you to try harder. I mean, maybe that's too much of a negative word, but it makes you desire to be better, because humans by nature, they want to relate to the people around them. So I'm in that way in a very fortunate situation that my association is so much better than what I am, which means that hopefully I'm able to make much faster progress than I would otherwise. And I am off on a tangent right now, so I better check my notes and see where we're at. Okay. Very much in this fourth chapter, and that is, so Vaishnav Das started talking about the sambandha-jnana, explaining it to Lahiri Mahashai. Okay, sorry about that. Once again, man, if anybody actually is gonna watch this video when it's on YouTube, I'm gonna buy them a case of kombucha or something. Where was I? Oh yeah. Okay. So Vaishnav does. I'm gonna wrap it up with this because the internet is so bad that I think everybody's gonna start tearing their hair out. So Vaishnav is sambandha-jnana to Lahiri Mahashai, and then Lahiri Mahashai, he came from this kind of like well, not kind of, but from like a Mayavadi or impersonal background, and so his idea had been that he just wanted to chant the Maha Mantra with Vaishnavas so that he could invoke these emotions without any kind of sambandha-jnana. And by these emotions, he would basically purify his heart and reach Brahman. And then he could cease doing Harinam. And his mind's a little kind of getting blown away by all this sambandha-jnana and this clear, beautiful understanding of what Vaishnav Das is giving him. But then some doubts, of course, are going to remain because we don't get purified in a second, although he does get purified in a few days. Okay, we're back. So he has a doubt nonetheless, Lahiri Mahashai, about Krishna's form, which makes sense. If you have a impersonal conception, the idea that God has a form seems like it's a limitation on God, that basically the formless face of the absolute is higher than provincial and kind of like limited to one place and one manifestation. And what Vaishnav Das says is that the very form of Krishna is all pervasive and everywhere at the same time, omniscient and omnipotent. And then he asks Lahiri, which is more amazing, the fact that you can have an apparent form that is made out of pure spiritual consciousness and bhav, and this form that's actually everywhere at the same time, or this indefinite formless spiritual fog, really, that's just like spreads everywhere. I mean, which is more amazing, which is more like incredible in terms of what the limits or the limitlessness of the absolute is. And it's clear that the fact that there can be an apparent form that is everywhere at the same time and has all the qualities you can imagine and beyond, that's just incredible in itself. And I think I'm going to stop there because of the internet, and I think I've said enough anyway. And okay, so that's it for me today. And I really want to thank you all again for your patience. It's a sattvic, probably a Vaishnav quality, but I think it's one of the quality of the Vaishnavs is patience. So you have proven yourself to be true Vaishnavs today. And if you want to risk okay, let's see. Matthew says, thank you for the wonderful lecture. Well, thank you for coming. The interruptions were fine. They allowed time to reflect on all these points. Yeah, that's actually a very good way of looking. A lot of the Okay, I'm just going to wrap it up real fast before it freezes again. So thank you all so much. And let's hopefully freeze a million times again next week. Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Hari Bol.